Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. Let's get started right away. Dow Jones down 0.7%, Nasdaq down 1.3%, S&P 500 down 82 basis points, and Russell 2000 down 1.2%. Nvidia and other chip stocks are leading the markets down today. Nvidia was down as much as 8% today. Let's see where it is right now. 7.5%. Yeah. It's basically at the lows of the day. Tesla, we need to change the name of this space. I welcome any suggestions. Maybe back to Tesla. Yeah, you know what? Let's do that. I really like that name. Tesla will triple in 2022. Was there an exclamation point? Let's see. I don't remember. Let's see if there's an exclamation point. That was my favorite name, and I got pressured into changing it. Let's see. Tesla Live. When did I change that? Tesla Live. Give me one more second here. Tesla Live. No, it says Tesla Live all the way to. All right, let's see. I don't think there was an exclamation point. I think it was just Tesla will triple in 2022. But we can change that later if I find out that it was an exclamation point. If you could please take a moment to like and repost the articles at the top, I would appreciate it. Let's go and read this Reuters article. Tesla's down 2%, $287 per share, beta of about 2.5. It's almost like the stock is getting more and more volatile as time goes on. Now down 2%, $286 per share. Yeah, amazing. Okay. Wall Street slips after February manufacturing data. Yeah, February data has been coming in very weak. I think that we might be going into a recession here, and maybe possibly a stagflation, which is worse than a recession. Wall Street's main stock indices slipped on Monday after data showed that new orders at U.S. factories fell in February, while investors awaited details on tariffs on top of trading partners that are expected to kick in at the end of the day. ISM survey showed manufacturing was steady in February, but a measure of tracking forward-looking new orders contracted to 48.6 last month from 55.1 in January. I'm going to make a quick change. Let me know if you can hear me okay. Let me know if you can hear me all right now. And YouTube, please let me know as well. Give me 1 second. All right. Okay, great. I see a thumbs up from ECT about sound quality being good. Good. Libby says I can hear you. Okay, great. Yeah, these AirPods work wonders. I mean, I'm at a noisy coffee shop right now with people talking and coffee grinding going, and I have my beanie up too on my head, and it's still just no problem. It's amazing. All right. ISM survey showed manufacturing was steady in February, but the measure tracking forward-looking new orders contracted to 48.6 last month from 55.1 in January. That's a massive drop. And that spells, I mean, manufacturing is only 10% of the economy, but people were getting, economists were getting a bit optimistic about manufacturing after the January reports, which may have been because of kind of like front loading orders in anticipation of tariffs. And now we're kind of seeing the other end of it, I think. And in the meantime, services contracted according to S&P Global PMI surveys as well. But S&P Global is a bit of a has a bit of a different focus than ISM. S&P Global is more, their indices are optimized for global tracking, whereas ISM is a bit more US centric. Also, S&P Global, I think, is on more. ISM is a bit more employment, which could be breaking here. So we're going to get on Wednesday ISM survey for services, and if that confirms a lower reading, like a contractionary reading below 50, like the S&P Global Services PMI showed last week, then I think we have a problem in the economy. I think we can't call the recession at that point. Although business activity is in expansion territory by a narrow margin, this is from manufacturing, back to manufacturing survey. Given the tariff uncertainty in the near term, it is likely that data will continue to reflect a cooling economy until there is more clarity on US President Donald Trump's trade policies, said Thomas Hayes, chairman at Great Hill Capital. Trump is expected to decide what levels of tariffs will impose early on Tuesday on Canada and Mexico, amid last-minute negotiations over border security and efforts to halt the inflow of fentanyl opioids. The one thing that this article doesn't mention in the ISM manufacturing PMI is that not only new orders dropped, but also prices paid surged. So the prices paid component of ISM manufacturing PMI came in at 62.4, and that is the highest reading in 2 years, if not longer. So it's actually worse than late 2023. So that's why there's a possibility that we might be entering a stagflation here. Lots of different surveys are showing stagflation is ahead. For those of you who just joined, please take a moment to like our repost what is pinned in the nest. These are the two articles I published last week before and after NVIDIA earnings that predicted an NVIDIA stock drop. And I think this is the kind of the marker, I think, of a breakdown in the stock market, because US stock markets are historically elevated valuations. They are the most overvalued across the world. Semiconductors are the most overvalued sector in the US stock market, and NVIDIA is the most overvalued stock in the most overvalued sector in the most overvalued stock market, which is the most overvalued assets bucket right now, in my opinion. So NVIDIA stock is down now 8%. Any questions, comments, please request to speak. We're going back to the Tesla will triple in 2022, the original name of the space. Because I didn't appease anyone anymore. I don't have any patrons, no subscribers, no sponsors, whatever. All right. Any questions, comments? Please request to speak. Otherwise, I'm gonna dig into maybe the ISM manufacturing report a little bit, or we can dig into Tesla figures. There's clearly a bit of a breakdown on Friday and today across markets. Tesla stock is now 2.5% down at $285. I think the sentiment got really bearish in the last few weeks very quickly, way quicker than I was expecting, honestly. But So I was expecting a bit of a bounce, and we did get that on Friday, um, along with the Nvidia stock as well. But we'll see if this bounce has legs. I doubt it because the fundamentals of the company is really bad right now. So, um, so I highly doubt that this bounce. I highly doubt that we're not going to see below 270 in the next few weeks here. The low on Thursday was 200 and XT is coming up. The low on Thursday was $273 per share. So we're going to test that again. I think it looks like we're going to test below 280, and then we'll see what happens after that. XT, go ahead.
Yeah, don't you think like the new refresh of the Y should be good for the company? Because it looks like it was the best-selling car last year. So did you think the numbers should be good on that one?
Well, I mean, we only have one data point to compare that to, and that is the Model 3 refresh. Model 3 Highland did not lead to an increase in Model 3 sales. I think because one, consumers are getting pinched. I think consumers struggled a little bit more in last year, in the first full year of the Model 3 sales, new Model 3 sales versus 2023. So the unemployment rate increased throughout the year. I think that might be one. Two, interest rates remained high, which is still true, although not to the same extent. Interest rates have come down about 50 basis points in the last few weeks here, and they might, if this stock market sell-off continues, they might continue down a little bit more. But on the other hand, what we are seeing is a clear rise up against what Elon is trying to do. And to the extent that people associate Tesla with Elon, that headwind is only going to be worse in Europe, California, other liberal states across the country this year versus last year. So, I mean, there are other reasons as well that we can, kind of explore here, but I think most of those reasons are still applied this year than last year. So, like the Elon factor is more of a headwind this year than last year. Like last year, we weren't seeing these protests across, at many Tesla stores. And then, interest rates are still high, like I said. I think unemployment rate might continue to increase. I think unemployment rate will continue to increase this year. Although Stephen Cohen says he expects lower unemployment rate, even though he's bearish on the market. So I guess that's one place we can look, but data shows deterioration in delinquencies for auto loans, and as even though that's mostly subprime, that still impacts Tesla as well because indirectly, a lot of Tesla's buyers are prime, excellent, great credit type of folks with higher incomes. But at the same time, if subprime borrowers can't buy used Teslas, and that lowers used car prices, that pressures in return new car prices and margins. So it's not like they're subprime versus prime is independent of each other. And then also, I think student loan repayments have started about a year ago, but there was a 12-month kind of like a 12-month kind of ramp on kind of like more help for students to go back to their original payments. And then after that, there was a 90-day period of credit scores getting hit. So there was a 90-day grace period that started at the end of October. So that would be November, December, January. So in February and March, I think we're going to see credit scores declining as well. So people are going to get their emails and mail notices in mail of late payments, delinquencies. They're going to see their loan balances growing with late fees and all that. So I just don't think it's a great period for the consumer right now. So I think it's going to be a much worse period than last year. So I don't see how Model Y Juniper can have a better showing than Model 3 Highland did. Anyway, Stephen.
Did you see Morgan Stanley's article on Tesla?
No, I didn't see.
Okay, never mind. They just, another new price target. They see a bright future, but if you haven't seen it, I was wondering your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna if somebody has a tweet with pictures, maybe Sawyer may have shared something. Let's see. Let's see if Sawyer has shared something from Morgan Stanley analyst Adam Jonas. I don't see anything. That's interesting. Well, if somebody has screenshots of the report and embedded in a tweet, I can look at that. Ford reported today a 9% drop in auto sales for February, while Toyota reported a 5% drop in US during the same month. Sales of Ford gas-powered models fell nearly 13%, while electrified sales, EV and hybrid, rose about 23%. Nothing new there. Sawyer got his VIN assigned for his new Model Y. In an arson attack, a dozen Tesla vehicles were torched outside of a dealership near the southern city of Tallahassee in France last night. Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, I think I saw a tweet the other day that said something like, how come France, we're not seeing these protests in France against Tesla? There you go. An investigation has been opened into criminal act, according to prosecutor's office. Okay. I mean, it's hard. I think it's going to be hard for, this is another thing, like I mentioned just a second ago. These headlines did not exist last year as Model 3 Highland was ramping around the world. They now exist this year as Model 3 Juniper and Model Y Juniper is ramping. And I bet you people fear for their life when they get into a Tesla. I bet you some people will choose to buy other cars because they fear it for their life because of headlines like this. And, nobody wants their car torched. Nobody wants their car scratched because the CEO is doing something that's controversial. So I don't know how this is going to end, but I can definitely see things getting worse before they get better. Ekti,
Don't you also think that the 0% interest rates have stimulated the car buying market in the last few years? As its rates have gone up to 5%, I mean, that's way more expensive than zero, right? So the car sales should be declining all aboard, not just Tesla, but everything that's expensive and it's sensitive to higher rates should decline, right?
yeah. Steven, is there anything you saw on that report that you want to discuss? Steven? Let me see if Chris wants to come up. Ekti, was there a question there?
Yeah, I was also wondering, last time you said that only 2% of the people were paying for FSD. That's shockingly
I didn't
low.
say that. I didn't say that. Two. Did I say 2? I didn't say that.
Maybe I remember incorrectly. Do you know what the percentage is?
I don't know what the percentage is, but it's low. I think I estimate the daily active users at around 100 to 200,000, weekly active users about 2 to 300,000, and then monthly active users at about 400 to 500,000. And so, you have in the US, you have about in North America where it's available or where it has been available, you have about 3 to 4 million users, Tesla owners. So let's say weekly active users 400,000. You're looking at about 10% weekly active users. I don't know where you got the 2% idea. Chris,
Maybe.
Hey, what's up? I was just looking at that Morgan Stanley report. It's very thoughtful and reasonable. I'm still going through it now. I'll pull some screenshots.
Okay, why don't you do that while I finish the rest of the article? Thank you, Chris. Defensive sectors such as healthcare and consumer staples gained about 0.6% each, while cyclical stocks such as metals and energy dipped after the data. Recent reports of softening consumer demand have spurred fears of a slowdown as markets prepare for higher inflation once Donald Trump administration tariff policy takes full effect. Wall Street's main indices logged their first monthly decline of 2025 in February, during which the Nasdaq also came close to a 10% drop from its all-time high due to fears of a rising inflation induced by tariffs and other factors. Yeah, interesting. Okay, Wall Street means interesting. So Nasdaq is almost 10% down. I didn't realize already. That's crazy. Fears of rising inflation induced by tariffs and other factors. I don't think inflation induced by tariffs is a big deal. But if tariffs turn into tariff wars, then that's a big deal. And so far, indications indicate that there might be tariff wars because China is also talking about increasing tariffs on US. So that's a big problem, I think, for Trump administration. So we'll see how that kind of shapes up. Please let me know how the audio quality is on YouTube. We might be getting something. My laptop is heating up again. Trump has also threatened that an extra 10% duty on imports from China will also take effect on Tuesday, which could spark a retaliation from Beijing. US listed shares of Chinese companies fell, with NIO and JD.com off about 4.5 and 2.4% respectively. The Federal Reserve has been cautious on interest rate cuts in anticipation of sticky inflation, but this week's employment and business activity data could change the institution's outlook. Traders have dialed up bets on the Fed's 2025 monetary policy easing cycle to at least 225 basis point worth of interest rate. I don't think they're going to get that. I think that people are going to be surprised about how the Fed kind of I think people are going to be surprised about how much the Fed waits before they cut rates any longer. I think inflation is the problem still. No, I don't want to say. I want to say I think inflation is solved. I don't think it's a problem, but I don't think the Fed can cut in the current environment with available data. Tesla rose 3% after Morgan Stanley reinstated stock as top pick among US autos. Crypto stocks such as MicroStrategy jumped 3.7%, Coinbase rose 1.9%, Intel rose 3.6% after a report chip designers NVIDIA and Broadcom were running manufacturing tests with the company. Advancing issues outnumbered decliners by 1.33 to 1 ratio on NYSE and 1.2 to 1 on NASDAQ. Chris, do you need more time?
Yeah, 2 more minutes.
U.S. trade policy uncertainty off the charts. Economic policy uncertainty index of U.S. trade anxiety has exploded higher in 2025, while the global economic uncertainty index is at record high. U.S. trade uncertainty, and there's a chart here with Trump re-election. Uncertainty has surged. I don't know how they're making this. Oh, economic pulse on certain units, LSEG data stream. Interesting. Interesting. Trump is expected to decide what level of tariffs he will impose early on Tuesday on Canada and Mexico. Okay. All right. Steven?
Oh, never mind. It wasn't important. I was just going to kill some time if you weren't ready.
I
mean, I had a question, but it's not important.
Yeah. Okay. Ekti?
What if they drop rates as inflation still hasn't come down all the way down, and plus Trump imposes tariffs? I mean, that would set off very high inflation.
I don't think they can cut rates in this environment.
Trump seems to want it, though. I do agree.
Yeah, I don't think Trump has any bearing. Or I don't think Trump's what he says or the calls he makes about lower interest rates is a factor in the Fed decision. OPEC Plus to proceed with April oil production increase. OPEC Plus, led by Saudi Arabia, has decided to proceed with an increase in oil production set for April, despite previous delays and political pressure from the US President Donald Trump to keep prices low. This move follows months of deferred production hikes intended to gradually increase global oil supply. Analysts suggest this could align with the long-term interest of stabilizing oil markets by balancing supply with expected demand growth. Yeah, that's interesting. As I mentioned before, I have a long position on Oxy now. Oxy stock, I mean, it was a small position, and I was thinking about maybe adding more later. And the stock is now down 3.2%. So Oxy is now down 3.2%. It is trading at the low of the year, or close to the low of the year, which is 45. And since I expect a recession, maybe I'll wait a little bit more before I increase my position here. But it's definitely one of the companies I'm looking into buying more on the long side. Okay. Cool. Chris just sent me. Chris, why don't you explain this to us? I'll pin it up here so that people can view it.
Sure, yeah. So Tesla, Morgan Stanley just put out a report on Tesla, and they have Tesla Mobility. That's what they're calling autonomy, the robotaxi network. They have it surging in the 2030s. So they did a good job, I think, mapping it out. But there's a lot of uncertainty when you're forecasting more than 5 years out. They did a lot of thinking on this, and but I think there's just a lot of uncertainty. So they have a $430 price target for 2030.
Can you walk us through the slides, your thread?
Yeah, I just basically just screenshotted some of the graphics. So the first one is Tesla mobility miles. So that's they basically have it really taking off in the early 2030s. And they're not really anticipating substantial robotaxi growth before that. So that's the first picture there.
Okay.
The second one, Tesla mobility fleet, we project relatively slow adoption before 2030 due to FSD development likely acting as a near-term limiting factor. For context, Elon has stated a goal of reaching human-level safety.
Let me do this.
Sure.
Okay. So the thread, Chris's thread is at the top. Tesla mobility miles. So nothing before 2030, or really nothing before 2035. And then it goes to hundreds of miles, hundreds of millions of miles. Is that a million or billions? Billions. Okay. What the fuck is this? Okay, I mean, like, I guess the gist of the report here is that they found their crystal ball and feel they can predict 10 plus years away, and maybe they develop their own internal chatbot or AI. Maybe Adam Jonas has his own rock and asked AI when Adam is I don't want to say it's we assume the robotaxi being is operating at 8 hours. I need to see, this is why we have this title. This title reminds me I was wrong, and I can't be too cocky, and I can't be, I can't get carried away with the correct course. That's why we have this title. We assume the robotaxi begins operating at 8 hours a day, ramping to 12 hours. I'm not going to read this. And now we have miles per car. Yeah, see, this is the part. I don't think you're going to get these miles per car. I don't think you're going to get these miles per. I think these are very overly optimistic assumptions here. I think in 2030 there's going to be a very high number of competing services, and I just don't see how each car travels this much. I don't know. Tesla mobility fleet, end of the year fleet, 7.5 million in 2040, 900,000 2030. Gross margin of 35%. This is just, I mean, these are impossible to predict at this point. That's 15 years away. Okay. DCF assumptions, discount rate, 0.35 unit economics per car, tolls. Okay. Yeah, Chris, what do you think about this research? If you want to call it that.
Yeah, I think they're not really factoring in like the level of competition that there's going to be, like especially like if China is allowed to operate in America, like that could really disrupt these forecasts.
Steven?
Also, this is all based on software that's not even working yet. They're assuming it's going to work in 2 months.
Yeah. You know who I really want up here is Jimmy the Other. I wonder if Jimmy the Other can join us, please. I have some questions for him. Yeah, Chris, I don't know if China will ever be able to allowed to compete in the US, but I don't know how you can have 7.5 million robotaxis in the US alone. So Tesla will have to compete with Chinese players around the rest of the world. So, and that's, you can't really base a global company's valuation just on US sales. Anyway, Jimmy, how are you?
I'm doing well, sir. I've never been invited up, but I'm very excited.
Well, Jimmy, recent reports show stagflation risk has risen. And despite my doubting of your expertise and knowledge on the matter, you were the first person to ever call it in this space. And I think you did it back in 2022, if not 2020, either 2023 or 2022. I'm not sure where you first called stagflation in this space, but that was the first I've ever heard it from anyone. So much respect to you. And I want to learn from you. I want to learn how you did that.
Well, the thing is, if you look at the Phillips curve, there was this theory by monetarists that if you can increase inflation, unemployment can theoretically go down in certain time periods. And I feel like over the last 40 years since Milton Friedman was basically arguing that the government, every single time it taxes, it's basically inflation. And on the other side, consumer expectations continue to go up. So in terms of Ricardian equivalence, we are unable now to judge forward as a society, the expectations of what the U.S. government will do. In order to save, we expect them to cut. Historically, that was true, but we can no longer do that. We just, since 2008, expect the supply of money to go up, and people don't really save that much. So on the other hand, the Taylor rule basically argued that inflation should be kept down to 2%. And according to the first bank that was doing this, first central bank, New Zealand, that it should be about 2.5%. If you can use the correct tools, levers, and policies, it could be kept down to that. It's consistent 2.5%. But these are just numbers at the end of the day, and without the psychology of the public to basically expect periods of inflation or deflation, essentially what occurs is an extended period of time where there's low growth, inflation, relatively high consumer demand through debt, and the cost of goods continue to go up, right? So that's on the one side, and I think that's the reason why policymakers are no longer really capable of reflecting on inflation genuinely. So the second part, and I've argued this a lot before, the number. So I worked in population data for quite a while, and I can tell you that the numbers from the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, and so forth are usually basically fictitious. I'll give you an example. There's a great book about this. I think I cited it at that time period, 2022. It's from 2020 or something like that, where a guy was a PhD at the London School of Economics asking the World Bank where it got its data for the growth of certain countries in Africa. So he called up World Bank. They told him it came from the UN. He calls up the UN Office of Economic Development. They say they got it from the Asian Development Bank. He calls up the Asian Development Bank. Asian Development Bank brings him over to the IMF. The IMF says they got it from the World Bank. And so he doesn't actually know where the data came from. And the whole book is basically why most of the data doesn't really actually exist. It's like the dead internet theory. It's, the theory that the internet is really just a bunch of bots. Most of the data that you see is based on illusion. It's not real. It's just numbers that people continue to grasp at, and they just kind of swaddle left and right and expecting that there's some truth to it, and people believe it. So that means that no one, not just policymakers or the public, but businesses can't really know how to save, how to invest. They're also basing a lot of their investment decisions on data, which is supplied by every government that they're working in, right? Doesn't matter if it's a European company or an American company or a Chinese company. They have to have the resources available when they, for example, issue debt. This is what we need for the next 5 years. And if the data for consumer growth is wrong or just doesn't really exist, how can you expect them to make the right decisions? And often they make the wrong ones in retrospect. That's the second part. But the most important part is this. Historically, over the last 200 years or so, there have been periods of strong growth, for sure, economic growth built on innovation, technology, and so forth. Today, though, I think Samuelson, who was a very famous economist back in the 70s, who I believe his nephew is, I forgot who his nephew was, also pretty famous, Rogman, I think. He's also the guy who's a very famous debt economist out of Harvard. Rogoff. He wrote a very famous book. Both of them actually argued, despite their very left-leaning tendencies, that data from the digital age, once you get past the 1990s, actually doesn't really reflect on the economic growth, right? And then when people asked, why is it that prices appreciate, they made a couple arguments. I mean, even Paul Krugman made this argument in one of his papers that got him his Nobel Prize. Again, a very strange thing. a lot of the economists who got Nobel Prizes wrote really, if you look at it, really kind of center-right looking papers in the sense that they detailed very clearly the reason why economic growth stagnates. And mostly it's because of government spending, mismanagement. I mean, it's a very strange thing. There was a very famous economist from the 60s and 70s who wrote, like, the World Bank is just misusing money, and it's $1 trillion trap, and so forth. So anyway, the argument that many of these economists have is the misallocation of government funds has been going on for decades. And when you align it with the fact that we've become a highly urbanized society across the world, where population growth has actually decreased, but urbanization has increased, prices appreciate or tend to appreciate where people move to. Therefore, they're experiencing higher prices because they're now living in closer proximity to people who want goods and services. Government really, if they're unable to allocate resources towards that, cannot make their lives better, really, cannot improve economic productivity either. So the end result, as Milton Friedman argued in a very famous documentary from the 1980s, there is really very little growth. You'd be much better off just having a computer decide interest rates, because the people behind it who are deciding right now actually have no idea. As much as you do, they have the same idea, and it's not much. And so those three arguments led me to believe that there's going to be a long period of stagflation for many decades to come. It's not borne out in the data, and it's hard for people to identify. It's hard for people to recognize this when the stock market goes up. But it's something that people feel, and over time, people will realize it's true. Thank you.
Okay, Chris, can you summarize the 3 points for us?
Sorry, did you just say me?
Yeah.
I was cleaning my laptop screen, but I mean, to answer your question, no, I cannot summarize.
Okay,
Well, I can. One is
one.
the psychology of the markets and people, according to Ricardian equivalence, no longer can save or invest accordingly based on data.
Okay, hold
Historically,
on.
they have.
So because people can't save as they have been, because the American, let's be specific. So because the American population can't save as they did in previous decades, is that
Yes.
why you're saying that's why the inflation is persistent? Is that it?
Yeah, an increased heightened sense of consumer expectations lead to a demand in goods and services. Otherwise, if it was previous decades, people would stop buying and save, and there'd be not really deflation.
Hold
but
on. If it was previous decades, people would stop buying and save when? You mean when
Well,
COVID
that happened in the
payments came in?
1920s and 30s. Yeah. So under Warren G. Harding, he called it return to normalcy. So after World War I, he basically, told the American people, you need to stop spending. We're going to raise interest rates. And all the millions of American men who've come back to the United States, they need their jobs back. There's going to be a recession, and we're going to have a return to normalcy. That was his argument. And so that would be an example.
Okay. And then number two.
So number two, the data, it's not real.
Okay, data is not real.
And the third thing is population demographics, how that's changed. Increasing urbanization has led to a feeling that prices are going up, when in reality, they're just living in closer proximity to the same people who need the same goods and services. And there's nothing that government can do about that.
Why does urbanization lead to prices going up again?
Well, if you look at historically where there were cases of urbanization, for example, Genoa back in the 1600s, and you could find many examples of this, prices go up when people live together. They need food, they need a lot of things, especially public services. And because of the demand for that, it's expensive. For example, provide power to people who live in a city who produce, to be honest, much less than they really produce. Like DC, for example. Washington, DC doesn't really produce a lot of services, but it certainly costs a lot of money to maintain their heightened sense of consumer expectations. And there's nothing that technology can do to fix that. The prices of tomatoes for those people who live in DC, all the way out there, cost of refrigeration, supply chains, will not change the cost of tomatoes in the future.
Okay. If you were Powell today, hold on, to fix this problem that you're foreseeing, Jimmy, that you said will last for decades, that's a massive prediction. So you're expecting stagflation for decades. Did I hear that right?
Yes.
Okay. To fix this problem, which position would you want, first of all? Would you want to be the Fed chair or would you want to be the president?
Well, I don't think the Fed chair can do anything at this point about it. The President of the United States could by cutting the debt in some way, by reducing the deficit and enacting strong plans to basically lead to a strong recession and return to cycles. There could be a lot of things to do. You could do credit controls by reducing the credit card debt, small example. A lot of stuff. I mean, people, for example, should remember after World War II, Europe faced massive rationing. And people think it was because of food shortages. No, that's not true. It was because governments were unwilling to increase interest rates because of the debt they now owed. So in order to manage expectations, people were rationing in Britain for 2 years after World War II, 1 egg per person per week. Otherwise, the price of eggs would have gone up too high. So no one could have afforded it, would led to shortages. We need something like that, not that extreme, but not price controls per se, but credit limits. Limits on government spending, limits on private spending, an increase in interest rates reflective of the actual real interest rate that exists based on the level of inflation if people really research it, which is much higher right now than 3%, much higher. Per year, it's easily 7 to 8 or even more, easily. And you're not the only one who laughed at me. I worked in finance too. I was laughed at. People would say, but the Fed says this, they would laugh me out of the room. My friends would laugh at me because they say the stock market's up. You know, how could there be any problem with the economy? What can you do when you don't have the data to back it up? But only theoretical arguments. And sometimes you get proven right. It may not be anytime soon, though.
Okay, so you said presidents can do more to solve this problem than the Fed chair. You said there's not much the Fed chair can do. And to solve this problem, you would first implement credit controls. So you would reduce consumption, but that would deepen the recession, right? So that would deepen the recession. But you're saying we need to get in front of inflation first. Is that it?
We need a real recession that leads
So what's the difference between credit controls applied by fiscal policy versus higher interest rates applied by the monetary policy?
Well, the problem with higher interest rates right now is you would not only have to cut all QE, but it would lead to a liquidity crunch where companies would no longer be able to borrow, leading to the complete collapse of the financial system. Unless there's going to be a backstop, which of course would just be the Fed in this case. You need to do it gradually. The best way of doing it gradually is through consumer controls. And you do it over a number of years through recessions. As they said back in the day, in the 1980s, it's a very common term, cleaning out the economy. Recessions clean out the economy. A lot of bad decisions, a lot of bad companies, and it allows the economy to replace them with better companies, people who make better decisions.
Okay, so the monetary policy can't do it with higher rates because that would lead to a liquidity crunch. But you're saying credit controls implemented by fiscal policy would not lead to a credit crunch.
Well, it just affects the consumers in this case. It doesn't affect institutions. Unfortunately, today banks are so big, it's a lot bigger than they were before. A seismic shock to one bank would affect the entire global financial system. I mean, if this was the 1990s, I would say, yeah, sure, the Fed, Alan Greenspan, if I replaced him. But today, it's so incredibly consolidated that if JP Morgan, for example, couldn't buy paper on the market, it would mean that every single company, which is already pretty heavily in debt, would not be able to go to the market as well. It would lead to complete collapse. And I think that would lead to a consumer confidence collapse. In the contrast, credit controls would lead to just a recession. It would lead to a 1920s style recession, an 1890s style recession, maybe mid 1960s recession. And we need several of them, to be honest.
Okay. Trying to think of other questions. So the Trump administration was talking about limiting the interest rate that credit card companies can charge consumers. Isn't that the opposite of credit
Yes, it's the
credit
opposite.
controls? Yeah. So, okay, did you vote for Trump? Do you mind sharing?
Sure, I did.
So, how do you feel about them doing the opposite of what you're recommending to solve the problem?
I think it was well known that he was fiscally liberal, socially conservative. I'm not surprised he's doing this. But, you know, if you look at Erdogan in Turkey, it's the same kind of conservatism. It's very populist, basically throws the economy into deep debt, it never ends. He just basically supports construction industries, telecommunications, the consumer debt industry, and it just gets worse and worse. And he still gets elected at the end of the day. And he's still socially conservative. People consider him a scion or a pillar of, you know, the family, you know, values and so forth. It's just the way it is. And I don't think there's any alternative. I have yet to see a fiscally conservative leader, with the exception of the Milei guy in Argentina, come about in the last 20 years.
Okay. So then you must be a big fan of Doge, is that right?
I'm not, because it's a Band-Aid. It's basically pretty much worthless. It's nothing more than what Bill Clinton did in the 90s. And honestly, he did a better job. He actually cut a larger percentage of government spending, and he did balance the books. They're cutting almost nothing. They're cutting maybe 40, 50 billion, maybe 100 billion. You know, unless they go to this Congress next year and ask for less money in the budget and reduce the budget, it also would mean nothing. And furthermore, almost all of his executive actions are worthless as well, because as soon as he leaves office, they could just be rescinded. So it's, you know, they need laws. I mean, he's passing a lot of stuff through himself as an executive order, but no laws whatsoever. I mean, telling credit card companies they can't do something, what's the point of that? The next president comes in and changes it. It's just so inconsistent, leads to really bad policy. And as I said before, how can consumers have expectations that are consistent when this wiggle of changing keeps on happening? They can't ever expect something in the future.
Okay. Zachary?
Hey, I'm sorry, I have nothing to say. I guess by mistake I requested it. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Okay. Jimmy, how are you positioned? Are you making any changes to your investment portfolio because of this?
Yeah, I'm buying real estate, buying gold. I have some Bitcoin. I don't really have a lot of stocks right now. I don't really believe in the stock market, to be honest. And I understand my position is very strange.
Yeah, how does stagflation play into real estate?
Well, in the times where it has happened in the 70s and, you know, after World War I and in certain European countries like in Germany, Weimar Republic and stuff like that, the people who came best off were those who own real estate, you know? So real estate holds value. I think the question isn't how much more money can you make, it's how much less money can you lose in terms of the depreciating value of the dollar and things like that. So it's not a question about profit. It's just a question about maintaining what you have.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Yeah, question for Jimmy. What did you mean when you say I don't believe in the stock market? And what about the stock market makes you not believe in it?
Well, Thank you. I would say the issue of the stock market today is without recessions, there's been very few shocks to the economy where you can see resilient companies. When I look at most of these companies, especially their balance sheets, so I guess the same reason why Warren Buffett doesn't really use all this cash. These companies are not strong. Their PE ratios are awful. Yeah, people say, oh, look, some of these companies like Facebook has a relatively okay PE ratio and so forth. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't dispute that. For historically, people will say PE ratios have not been that different compared to the 1920s or 1950s. It was 30 to 1 and so forth. I don't dispute that either. But if you look at their debt balance sheets and what they're using the debt for, that's what I dispute. You look at something like Walgreens, it basically wasted $10 billion in debt. And for what purpose? They're consolidating stores, reducing staff, giving you worse services. Is this a good company to buy for the next 50 years? Will it even be around? Do we even need those types of grocery stores? That's an open question. And I think that's true for a lot of the stock market. They're simply so badly managed, got access to so much cheap debt. I sometimes just question the financial viability of these companies built on debt. If they could not go to the bond market tomorrow, how long would they last? And I don't think it would last long, so therefore I don't want to buy their stocks.
Jimmy, despite all the risk that you see on growth as well as inflation, how do you explain credit spreads remaining historically tight today?
That's a fair point. Anyone who does credit analysis will tell me that. My argument there is it's only true that the credit markets look strong until they're not. Every crisis bears this out. It's very rarely a gradual widening and indications of a problem. It's very sudden. And stagflation, sure, it's gradual, but it doesn't mean that the economic effects of it are gradual. It's just something that can't be stopped. It gradually makes the economy worse, reduces growth, real growth. But the stock market eventually gets those shocks and barely recovers. And I think that's what will happen. People will stop believing that the stock market represents the economic value of the countries of the index. It may not happen tomorrow, it may happen in 10 years.
Okay, thank you. Do you see the risk of a third world war? Let's switch to your geopolitics. Do you see the risk of third world war rising today?
No, I don't. I actually believe the risks were probably higher in the past, especially under Obama, most because there's so many foreign interventions where countries were on different sides of them, and that could have led to a much worse outcome for everyone, despite the JCPOA and his old Iran deal. Today, Russia is a shadow power. It's simply not strong enough to fight the West. China is the only country capable of declaring nuclear war and actually winning it. If we admit that Russia is just a shadow of itself, do we have to continue pressuring Russia into a corner? What more can we expect out of them? If people believe that Russia will become very irrational, my argument is this. Putin has been around for a long time. If he was truly an imperialist, why is it that after invading Georgia, he only took over the northern part and didn't go for Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, and occupy the whole country?
Okay,
And I can go on.
I understand all that, but what about China though? Like you said, China it has the power to start something and compete with US.
I don't think that's the history of China. It's a country right now managing the gradual decline of the West, especially the United States. It knows it will be around in 100 and 300 years. That's the Chinese mentality. They'll be around still. And once the whole world has collapsed, their theory that this is truly what they believe, they'll still be around and they'll be in charge. Historically, in their belief system, they were the most important economy for most of history. They were the most important superpower in the East for most of history. It was not Japan. It certainly was not Korea, India either. And they just have to wait. They don't need to declare war and start World War III to achieve its aspirations.
Well, in that case, isn't the West incentivized to start something then?
Sure, I could accept that. I do believe, though, there's enough safeguards to keep a president from starting thermonuclear war. I also believe the chances of France and the UK starting thermonuclear war is pretty low. Those are the only countries in the European continent and in the European sphere who have nuclear weapons. If Pakistan and India start shooting at each other, that would probably not lead to global war, and it's unlikely that they would. I think it's an open question if India and Pakistan's nuclear weapons are even pointed at each other and actually work. I know people may laugh at that. Pakistan has not upgraded its nuclear stockpile in 60 years. It doesn't actually have that many operational nukes. India may be pointing almost all of its nukes at China, especially since the 1970s when they had a war with them. So I really don't expect Pakistan and India to start a war anytime soon. And as I said, I'm not expecting India or China to start a war anytime soon between each other.
Okay,
So I think the chances are very low.
got it. Thank you. Let's go to zoom into shorter term, 2025. Do you see tariff wars escalating from here? How do you see the next kind of few weeks, months playing out?
Well, certainly tariffs will increase. They have to. Most of the tariff economy is very unfair to certain countries. There are a number of people who spoke up against NAFTA back in the day. Their arguments still ring true that why is it cheaper for China to export goods to the United States than vice versa? At the time, China was a relatively poor country. Now it's no longer a poor country. That cannot be true forever. Tariffs will ramp up. It will make everyone poorer. I don't dispute that. Tariffs are bad for the global economy. I also don't dispute that. But the issue of fairness will arise, and over time, it's not something that can be stopped. There are no more free trade treaties that have been signed in the last few years. It's a no-win for an electorate. No one really sees the value of them. So again, it's just going to be something that adds to inflation, to the price appreciation, and it slows down economic growth. But in a good world, in a perfect world, it would not have been like this. Tariffs have been removed. There have been growth, and countries would not have heavily subsidized certain industries to capture sectors of the economy for national security reasons. But that is not what happened. They did do that. They subsidized sectors for companies that don't make any money in the belief they would secure their geopolitical position. And over a period of decades, they've achieved a lot of those aims. Like, for example, the military-industrial complex of the United States, capturing the supply chain of even European defense companies, where they become suppliers to American companies who, for example, the F-35 program, they can't even have a fifth-generation fighter of their own. It would be too costly, and they wouldn't have been access to the same suppliers that are currently locked into contracts with Lockheed Martin. Or you could go down the list, China and its near monopoly over CNC machining, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's something which it's a shame that it's happened, but it's happened in the belief that it'd make the world safer and countries stronger. But people recognize how bad it is now and how unfair it is. And I just think that it's just going to lead to more tariffs.
Okay. All right. More tariffs in 2025. Jimmy believes that, Jimmy, I understand the concept around if they're charging us more, then we should charge more. But, China has signaled that they want to, retaliate. So that you expect tariff wars to escalate, and maybe eventually you might see like a kind of
I'm not
reciprocal.
sure what China can retaliate on except for American airplanes. They don't buy anything from the United States that's value added in terms of finished goods that really matters, that they don't need. They buy soybeans, they buy wheat, they buy pork. These are all things that if they raise tariffs, they're essentially hurting themselves. They don't buy anything else that they can just find another producer for it. So what are they going to raise tariffs on?
Well, I guess they can retaliate in other ways, right? By making life even more difficult for U.S. companies, including Tesla.
I think, they like Elon because it's like a Chinese idea of like a friendly white guy. He's a good guy. He came into China and, he's really popular in China, very popular. He built his business locally. It employs almost entirely Chinese staff. He's not a majority shareholder. They produce in the Chinese market. A lot of it's for export to the Southeast Asian market. They're producing technology that they can copy. If it was 10 Tesla companies, there would be a problem, sure. But there's only one Tesla, only one major American company doing something like this. And honestly, if you go to Chinese secondary schools, what will happen is the headmasters of those schools will say, you need to be like Elon Musk. You need to be like Xi Jinping. You need to be a thinker. You need to be a hard worker. Oddly enough, Elon Musk has become a role model for a lot of Chinese society. And I just don't think that they're going to punish Elon for the same thing that they're telling their kids to be.
Very interesting. Thank you, Zachary.
I just want to start with I correctly predicted the Russian invasion 8-9 months before it happened, and I'm guarantee you China is going to take Taiwan before Trump is out of office. A Chinese agent, believe it or not, who has spoken more than once that Taiwan belongs to China and needs to be taken. So now the only question is, would the United States fight back and oppose China from taking Taiwan, or would China pay a bunch of money to Trump to stay down and said it's not a problem, just like he believes it's not a problem of Russia taking Ukraine? And 100% of China. And the only way he can become to be recognized historically in China as a great leader. And that can be achieved only by taking more territory, which is Taiwan, back, or taking portion of Russia that used to belong to China. So either he needs to take portion of Russia that used to belong to them, or Taiwan. One of these two is going to happen for sure before Trump is out of office. And I'm willing to bet every dollar to my name that he's going to do that. Or take.
Wow. Okay. Zachary says he's willing to bet every dollar to his name that China will enter Taiwan or take a portion of Russia. Jimmy, your response?
He can do that already. Go to Polymarket, take a screenshot. Will China invade Taiwan in 2025? Yes, 11%. So you can make 9 to 10x on your money. All you need to do is take a screenshot.
He said, will it happen before Trump exits the office?
Okay, I will create a Polymarket thing for him. And if he takes a screenshot of him investing all of his money in it, I will give him $1,000. And he has to keep that money in there for at least 1 year at the end of the Trump administration.
Zachary?
Myself, for that to happen, I bought a lot in Intel. It's gonna 100% up because it's gonna be the only people who can make computer chips. So that's happening for sure. I'm not going to bet on it. I'm invested and I put all of my money into that. and the other half it's Europe is
You
pulling
just
away
said
from.
you were.
I'll bet you some amount of money, but no, I'm invested in it, and I'm like I'm certain this is gonna happen. And again, bookmark it, put it in your calendar.
Okay,
It's coming.
Zachary, we're going to do a coffee bet between you two, if you guys are okay with that. Zachary, we don't want to wait 4 years. When do you think it's more like? So you think it's definitely gonna happen in the next 4 years? When do you think is the 50% probability threshold? So by what time it's more likely than not that China will have invaded Taiwan?
They're already building the invasion ships. You can see plenty of pictures from space. It's from barge that has a huge ramp to be pulled down to have the equipment come down. It's already been built. I don't know how fast can they build more of them. I will not be surprised if they just give a bunch of money to Trump and say, okay, tell Taiwan, we're not gonna back you up. Let's don't destroy Taiwan. Just reunite with us. It could happen that way too.
Okay, Jimmy, any thoughts?
On whether or not China will take over Taiwan, economically, Taiwan,
Zachary says they're all building the invasion ships.
they are building a lot of aircraft carriers. That's true. That's been going on for years. Taiwan is already economically integrated into the PRC pretty heavily. China, the mainland, will just expect that they'll join voluntarily. No reason to risk becoming a pariah state by taking it by force, a place that will essentially join mainland China eventually over time. For them, they do not talk about it like Zachary talks about it. Xi Jinping is going to invade Taiwan and expand our borders. In Chinese logic, it is within their borders, but it's a rebellious province. It is China. There is no borders that are in question here. Not even the Taiwanese government claims that they're not in China. They are in China. So you don't need to expand borders where they already exist. Their belief, and you may not be like, oh, but it's not even true. Their belief is not only is it just rebellious, but essentially the people there have been hijacked by the CIA, who have implanted anti-PRC forces and have led to anti-mainland sentiment that it leads to, these crazy people who are locked up in insane asylums in the mainland China when they say things like, Taiwan is not China. You can go to an insane asylum if you say something like that in the mainland. Obviously, no one is dumb enough to say stuff like that in the mainland. So it will just incorporate it. It will be like Hong Kong was. They took it over, and it was incorporated. It will be finished incorporating in 15 years, and that's what will happen to Taiwan. There was a lot that happened in their psyche. Chiang Kai-shek, for example, became an important national figure again. He was respected again. They no longer consider the old KMT, the old Kuomintang leaders, to be anti-mainland, anti-communist. They consider them to be wayward, misunderstanding of the policies of Mao Zedong, but people who were fundamentally patriotic. But they believe the current leaders of Taiwan are unpatriotic, CIA stooges. And so they'll go away, and then Taiwan and its normal people will come back and just choose to stop being rebellious. Borders don't change.
Okay, Zachary, can we say by the end of 2026?
Really correct. They view it as China and as rebellious. And again,
Zachary, can we say for the coffee bet? Can we say by the end of 2026?
of really nice expensive bourbon. I have a liquor store, and against his coffee.
Okay, so by the end of 2026, right, Zachary? Sorry, you cut off. By the end of 2026. So I'm giving you 2 years for China to invade Taiwan. And Jimmy said they've been building aircraft carriers for the last few years. So that's going to be the 50-50 cutoff for between you and Jimmy. All right. And we're going to track this. Cool.
Russia. What?
Exactly. You're cutting off so bad. Sorry, I have to move you down. Your audio is cutting off so bad. I'm going to take there's a yes. I think I heard the yes somewhere in there. All right. So let's see. Let me just type this up real quick. Okay. Coffee bet. China invades Taiwan by 2026. And by means by the end of. Yes is Zachary. And Zachary's handle is Zachary 1978. Okay. And no is Jimmy the Other. And so it thumbs up there from okay, Jimmy the Other.
Mm-hmm.
146. Okay, cool. We have a coffee bet.
Great.
Cool. Man, I mean those are some strong words, Jimmy. I don't know. You guys are both smart. But Zachary says, I'm willing to put every single dollar to my name on this. Not by the end of 2020, but he said that for by the end of 2028, basically.
Well, again, I could spin up a poly market pool on that. It's not hard.
Yeah. Okay. How do you feel about Tesla?
I'm feeling it's a terrible stock. I do have some investment in it, not much. It's going to be an awful stock in the next few years, but it's a good long-term investment. So I'm not worried about the price. If it goes down to 100 to 50, I still think that it will be a company that will be around in 50 years. I mean, it no longer produces the fastest EV. It no longer produces the sexiest EV, the cheapest EV, the most easily produced EV. But maybe something good comes out of it. You never know.
Okay, so what do you think that something good may come out of it is?
It's like guillotine insurance. You never know. But I would say maybe something in robotics in 20 years, maybe 30 years. I would say still have a strong community of investors who support the company. After Elon is gone, maybe something with Mars, something with the moon. People may laugh at me, but you never know.
Do you think Elon's gonna quit Tesla?
Probably in the next few years.
Chris?
Yeah, I find it funny how confident people are when they say like Tesla's like a great long-term investment. I'd be curious to hear from you, Jimmy. Like, if you think Elon is going to quit Tesla, probably is what you said. What makes you say that like Tesla's a good long-term investment?
Well, you never know what you don't know. Apple was a fucking awful investment in the 1990s and still turned out well. I because of that experience, you just never know. I'm so sorry. That is my only reasoning. You just never know. And I could list a lot of companies where they were doing really, really badly for a decade, 2 decades, and suddenly surged back. That's just, it could be Tesla.
Okay. All right. That's a lot of information, Jimmy. Thank you very much for coming. I'm gonna re-listen to the space and take more notes. Hard to do so when you're hosting. So anything else, Jimmy or Chris?
Yeah, I would just say, whatever you do right now, buy real estate. Buy lots of real estate.
All right, thank you, Jimmy. All right, thank you very much, everybody. We're gonna end on that note, and I will chat with you all tomorrow. Take care.